Okay, everyone. Now we're going to have a panel discussion. Please submit your questions as you want. I mean, it's really open-ended, and we're here to answer your questions. And so here we have Joel, David, Mike Cobb, and Rachel Jensen should be coming on soon. And you've heard all of them speak, and I will personally thank all of them for participating in the event. And so, yeah, I think that's Rachel coming in right now. All right, so we have some talking points, but we really want this to be a free-flowing discussion. But the first question I'll ask everyone is, why would I need a second passport or residency when I have a great passport like the US or like American or Canadian?
I'll take it at first. For an American, you would want a second citizenship, so you give yourself the optionality of leaving the game or leaving the U.S. tax system, which requires an expatriation, and so that you don't render yourself stateless. It's also an opportunity, both for Canadians and Americans. I always have to preface this next story with the fact that the Les Perez children, we didn't go out night clubbing looking for Europeans, but as it turned out, my older sister married a Latvian, my brother married an Italian, I married a Scot and then a Pole, and my younger sister married an Irishman. And so the moral of the story is, well, I'm the only one of my generation to actually pick up and move to Europe. All of my nieces and nephews, and now their children, all now have access to huge parts of the world that they would not ever otherwise have had to live, work, and study. And having an alternative citizenship, of course, became very important during the pandemic. And who knows what the future has.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that comment. Very few Americans will actually ever expatriate. So the vast majority of people that get a second citizenship, that's what it is. It adds to what you already have. But you know, as David just commented with his last point about during COVID, we saw the U.S. passport go from being valid in a visa-free way in over 150 countries. Overnight, it was reduced to 26. So, you know, there were a lot of places in the world that you couldn't travel with the U.S. passport. I think people really want it as a plan B, an option. You know, it's like, why do you buy insurance? It's not because you think you want your house to burn down tomorrow. You buy insurance so that if something bad happens, you have a place to go. And that applies both to citizenship and residency. For some people, you know, if they have a residency card somewhere, they know they can get on a plane and go, whether it's to Panama or Belize or Portugal or wherever, you know, anytime they want, and stay for as long as they want. It just gives them more peace of mind.
I'll weigh in. I think one of the fallacies that people have coming out of the US and Canada, especially, probably a lot of European countries as well, is this notion that, you know, if things really go south, I'm just going to leave. And again, Joel mentioned the visa-free travel to 100 plus countries, and presumably our visa-free status will come back at some point as US citizens. But, you know, as Canadians, Europeans, US citizens, we can get on a plane and we can fly to a lot of countries without a visa. We walk through the immigration line and they stamp your passport and say, hey, welcome to Jamaica, welcome to Bermuda, welcome to wherever. And it lulls us into a false sense of security that, yeah, if things really get bad here at home, wherever home is, I'm just going to leave. And great, you can. But it's really hard to stay, right? That's the point of a second residency, second citizenship, is that it's not the ability to leave, it's the ability to stay in that country. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I think is so fundamentally important to understand. And the other thing I hear a lot of people say, I speak at many, many conferences around the globe, and I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, I just get my passport stamped every 90 days. I do a border run, right? You cross the border, you leave for the weekend, you come back and they stamp you for another 90-day tourist visa. And that's all well and good, as long as the government's willing to do that, as long as the host country that you're touristing in is willing to do that. but that's an informal way of having a second residency. It's not particularly, well, I don't know if it's legal or not, but I mean, but it's not permanent. It's at the graciousness of your host to do it again in 90 days. And so for people who are truly concerned about their personal liberty, right, the protection and maintenance of their liberty, their freedom, the most important asset they have, themselves, having something real, legal, and permanent should be a very, very high priority. And it is for a lot of people. And Rachel talked about it earlier this week. Joel, I think you and David also talked about it. It should be something that we take action on much sooner than later, because you never know. The people in Texas who didn't have food and water in their basement when things shut down because of the ice storms, they wished, that they'd had it. So the old adage, better early than late. And there's no time like the present to protect that most important asset we have, which is ourselves.
And Mike, those casual arrangements of, crossing the border and crossing back, they all came to a screeching halt, during COVID.
Yes, they did.
In Panama and Costa Rica and Belize. And yeah, they were, they went to leave and they couldn't come back. So all
Right.
they could do was try to figure out how to get on a plane and, fly back to the US. So again, it really is about having more options.
All right. So the next topic point goes into one of the first questions we got. What's the least expensive residency or citizenship program? And I know Panama will probably be brought up by Rachel, and she talked about it. And then one of our questions talks about the background check and kind of the deadlines for everything with the changes. And so, yeah, I mean, we can talk about the least expensive one, residency and citizenship, and then Rachel, I'm sure that'll lead into Panama.
Sure. And, just so everyone's aware, and it may have been discussed at some point during the conferences, is that residency is different than citizenship. Think of residency as getting a green card to a country which legally allows you to be there. And as Mike mentioned, that is a very important part of you either relocating or spending time abroad, is being able to be in a country and have the ability to stay somewhere. Citizenship is really when you get a passport to that country. And Joel, I'm sure, can go more into the nitty-gritty details, but just want to make sure that is clear to folks. A lot of times I get people saying, oh, tell me about the friendly nation citizenship. And in Panama, the friendly nations visa is a residency card. It's permanent. So once you obtain it, you have it for life. You don't need to keep reapplying. It's not temporary. It is permanent, but think of it as a permanent green card. And residency in Panama is by far the most affordable option that I've come across. I've done a lot of homework on different residencies around the world, and this is by far the easiest to obtain, the easiest to maintain, and the most affordable. And as we talked about during the presentation yesterday, this residency is going away as of August of 2021. So if people want to apply for residency, you have to do so in June, in the next 2.5 months, really. And once you do apply, you will be grandfathered in as long as you're able to make that first trip down to Panama over the next couple of months. Now, I know, Dan, something that you mentioned there was background report. I think regardless of where it is you're applying to, you do need to have a clean background report. This is certainly true for the countries that we work in Belize, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. Regardless of where you're applying, you do need to have a clean background report. If you have a small nick on it, I would recommend getting that expunged. I know typically I'm talking specifically here for the United States, it can take 10 to 12 weeks to get your background report from the FBI, but you are able to get it expedited. There are many expediting services. You can go to the FBI website, the government of US website, and get a list of approved channelers for that expedited process. But if this is something that is of interest to you, then I would recommend reaching out sooner rather than later. I think you all got the email address from the past couple of days, but ea@ecidevelopment.com will put you in touch with the residency attorney to get started. She'll send you a full list of everything that you need. Start submitting it to her, and then book your plane ticket down to Panama to get started there. But there are many different options. You'll find that many countries have different residency programs, but this one is by far the easiest to obtain, easiest to maintain, and the most affordable. And the great part is once you're grandfathered in, and you will be if you're able to make that trip down over the next couple of months, is you don't need to keep reapplying. As I mentioned, it's permanent. Once you have it for life. You'll be grandfathered into it. And so you don't need to keep reapplying. You just should visit one day every 6 years to maintain it. That's really the only requirement. So that would be my best suggestion for anybody looking to get started and do something. It's personally what I did about 4 or 5 years ago, got the residency in Panama. I live in Belize, but got the residency in Panama just to have it. And if I live down there, great. If not, well, at least I have it.
Another option is if the person happens to have a family history and an entitlement to a citizenship, which also gives them the right, if it's from an EU country, gives them the right not only to reside in that particular country of their citizenship, but also gives them the rights under the EU mobility rights to have 27 different countries to live in. But again, that's very fact specific. But the nice thing about Canada and the United States is during the 19th and 20th century, they were immigration destination countries. And so a lot of people happen to have that history.
Yeah, I'll just circle back on one of the other elements of your question, Dan, had to do with, the least expensive citizenship. I completely agree with David. If you have access to an ancestral one, great. That is by far the cheapest. I like Rachel's comment about Panama. Again, even after the changes go into effect, it'll still be one of the more reasonably priced residency programs. Now, as for citizenship by investment, the Caribbeans are basically the least expensive countries. There's 6 Caribbean countries that all have citizenship by investment, and for an individual, they range from between $100,000 to $150,000. There's different advantages to one versus another. There are a lot of little nuances depending on whether you're trying to get your professional credentials recognized, or you have a child, let's say, who's older. Some of them go up as high as 30 years of age for dependents. But the ones that I like right now from a price would be St. Lucia. They have a specific program that will expire at the end of the year. It's a COVID bond. Their bond program was normally $500,000. The COVID bond is half price, so it's $250,000. Basically, you're buying a 5, 6, or 7-year bond, depending on how many dependents you have. You get that money back at the end of the bond period. You don't get any interest. So your real cost is the opportunity cost on your money. So, it's of course less money to write a $100,000 check, but when you write that check, the money's gone. With the $250,000 bond, you write the check and you get the money back. So I do like that. And then I would say right now, the Dominica has, in my view, one of the best and least expensive citizenship by investment from real estate. It's just a little bit over $200,000. I know the ECI team works with a great developer there and can help people who are interested in that. So you're paying a little over $200,000, but you're actually buying something. It's not a donation. And so you have some value. So those are the ones that I like at the moment.
Daniel, your mute is on.
There's some questions coming in. There might be related, but probably some quick answers. If you have a background check for a firearm, is that sufficient criminal check?
Well, the requirements are country to country, so you have to look at which country you're going to and what their requirements are. But generally speaking, for an American, it would be an FBI check. For a Canadian, it would be an RCMP check. And with digital fingerprinting and, as Rachel was saying, facilitators, you get the check that is needed, but which one it is will be defined by the country's residence or citizenship you're trying to acquire.
Got it. Rachel, regarding the Panama Friendly Nation program and the deadlines, do you need to put in the application by 8/1, approved by 8/1, or visit by 8/1?
Yeah, so you need to go down to Panama and put in your application by August. And so you can send the attorney a lot of your information first. She can get started for you, but you do need to physically go down to Panama on that first trip, open up the bank account, register with immigration. And then from there, once you're registered in the system, then you're set.
Yeah, let me just chime in on that, Rachel. Because the deadline is so tight and coming up, when we work with clients, we gather all of the information, we scan copies, we send them down to be vetted ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is show up on, July 29th and find out that you're missing some documents or something like that. So we do that. We do the bank account ahead of time. We work very hard to make sure that we get green lights up and down the line. And then when you go down, we recommend you stay at least for a week. Then you can get a lot of your work done there, and then you're in.
Got it. Okay, so now regarding Dominica, Joel, in Dominica, if you buy real estate and get citizenship, how many years do you have to hold that property?
So the law says that you can sell the property as soon as 3 years. However, if you want to sell it for the purposes of the new buyer obtaining citizenship, it has to be 5 years. So what that really means is, if you've had it 3 years, you want to sell it, somebody who isn't interested in citizenship just wants to buy it from you, that can happen after 3 years. But if you're selling it to somebody such as yourself, normally an expat who is wanting to acquire that same property for citizenship purposes, then the holding period is 5 years.
Got it. Okay. Will you lose your Friendly Nations visa residency in Panama if you renounce your U.S. citizenship at some point afterwards?
Well, I kind of understand what the question's implying. First of all, like Rachel said, the Friendly Nations visa is only a residency. It's not citizenship. I mentioned in my presentation that U.S. law requires you to have another citizenship in order to expatriate and give up your U.S. citizenship. So buried down in the middle of that question, you'd have to ask, well, what citizenship would you still have if you gave up your U.S. citizenship, and would that country qualify? I think once you have your Friendly Nation visa, you're probably good to go. But if you're in the middle of the process, you're not done. If your citizenship you're relying on is Ireland or, Italy, someplace like that, probably it wouldn't affect it at all. But there are plenty of countries that they do not accept into the Friendly Nation visa program, particularly from Africa and Middle Eastern countries.
Rachel, ballpark amount to budget for getting the Panama residency? There's obviously a cost of the program, but there's going to be lots of fees on top of that. So just kind of a vague idea of the total cost.
Yeah, so the fee for the primary applicant is $4,680, and then dependents are an additional $1,900, and that covers attorney fees, it covers the immigration fees. What it does not cover is the money that you need to put into your Panama bank account to show that you meet the threshold. So as a primary applicant, you need to show you have $5,000 in a Panama bank account. As a dependent, you need to add $2,000 per dependent. So if it's you and your spouse going through residency, then you have to put the $7,000 in your bank account. You have the $4,680 as the primary applicant and the $1,900 for the dependent. And I don't have a calculator right here on me, but I just want to note that the $7,000 that money that goes into the bank account is your money. Once you get residency and you're approved, you're able to take it out as you want, or spend it, or keep it there as a savings or checking account. It really depends on what you're looking for. But that's the general cost. Now, obviously you need to factor in airfare and hotel and your meals when you're down there in Panama. But on that first trip down to Panama, you need to be there for about a week, 1 business week, 4 to 5 business days. So you obviously want to factor that in too. But I don't know who asked the question, but you can reach out to us and I can give you a quote And then from there, see if it's something that you're able to do. But you do need to pay those fees up front. You work directly with the attorney. She's going through your documents, making sure everything's good, booking your visits to the immigration office and the bank and all of that beforehand. So you do need to make sure you have that readily available.
And maybe I could just chime in and say that Rachel's comment about including the lawyer fees, she's talking about a Panamanian lawyer. That would not include fees from a law firm like mine, or I'm quite certain. You know, our fee on that, our fee alone is $12,500 for a family. We earn every penny of that. You will not make 6 trips down, having things, you know, messed up and have to go back and forth and back and forth. So I'm not disparaging whoever you're including in that fee, Rachel. I'm sure that they're very professional, but we have a lot of expertise in a firm like mine, and you know, we make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed before you ever get on a plane and go there. So yeah, you do have a higher cost, but try to deliver a better quality service.
All right, so there's definitely a lot of interest coming in about Panama, but one more question on Panama, then I think we can move to some other topics. So after you have the Panama cedula, how many years must you be there to get Panamanian citizenship passport?
Yeah, so once you have the cedula, it's 5, you're able to apply 5 years after you have the cedula. Now you do have to live there for a total of 2 years over that period. It doesn't have to be consecutive. It can be 2 months here, 6 months there, a year there. There also are requirements. You will need to learn Spanish because Spanish is part of the citizenship process. And note that you're not granted the citizenship just because you've met the time threshold of having the cedula for 5 years and spending 2 years in the country and knowing Spanish. You know, in any country where you're getting your citizenship through any other means that's not family lineage or economic means, they want to get to know the citizens. They want to know why it is you should be a citizen. So it's not automatic. You do have to go through the application process. It's fairly reasonable. It's about $3,500 US, but there's, you know, it's just not a guarantee that you'll get it. You have to make sure you're meeting the specific requirements. So it is possible. It certainly is possible. It'll take a little bit of time, but that's why you have the attorneys there to help you.
And one other thing I just mentioned as the attorney chiming in from left field, Rachel, I think you're spot on. But one thing I think a lot of people also need to understand is that under the Panamanian law and under the Panamanian Constitution, Panama does not allow dual citizenship. Now, everybody's going to tell you, well, they don't enforce that. Well, it's not a problem. Well, this, well, that. Okay, great. But the law and the Constitution says that you cannot be a dual citizen. That means that when you become a Panamanian citizen by law, you would, under Panamanian law, not under US law, you would have to give up your US or Canadian citizenship. So while Panama is an excellent country to get friendly nation visa, long-term residence, the cedula, the long-term card, in my view, it's not a country to rely upon for second citizenship unless you believe that you would be eventually willing to give up your US citizenship.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to a new topic. So David, this will probably, you can answer this first, but how can I find out if I qualify for ancestral citizenship if my ancestors came from Europe?
Well, Europe's a big place. Each country has its own rules. So one of the things that we do is have clients send us information in email, and from and we very quickly for free tell you whether you clearly do not qualify. If you do qualify and it appears that you meet the qualifications, because we just got to know every country, then the next question is, can we get the documentation necessary to be able to make a successful application? So the first stage is always to retain a genealogist, and we coordinate that. We know what documentation that they need, and we see if it's available. If it's not available, then we don't proceed. If it is available, then you submit an application pursuant to whatever the rules are. There's a very wide variation in the processing times, depending on if, for example, you have a an ancestor who was a citizen of Austria or Austro-Hungarian Empire and who left Austria as a result of Nazism, National Socialism, then the processing time, we just did one in 6 weeks. That's extraordinarily fast. Most citizenships, lineage citizenships, take generally a minimum of about 6 months all the way up to a year or two. Depends completely on which country we're talking about, whether you qualify and what the processing time and procedures would be. And another point Joel made, which is dual citizenship. Certain European countries will say in order to take on their citizenship, you have to give up your existing citizenship. So, that's a real question as to whether you may qualify for it, but you may not want to take it because that'll require you to give up your American and or Canadian or your current citizenship.
Yeah, Germany, for example, David.
Exactly.
Hey, Dan,
Yeah.
and co-panelists, I actually have to race off and give a presentation for the Money Show people here in a couple minutes. But I want to thank you all for having me on the panel, and I want to thank everybody who's joined us. I'm going to sign off, but obviously you guys stick around and keep doing a great job, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody in person one of these days. So take care, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. All right, we'll move on to the next question. Why would someone pay a lot of money for citizenship in a country like Malta or Austria when you can obtain one in a Caribbean country for around $100,000?
Joel, either one of us can answer that in a heartbeat. Okay, so couple of reasons. You get it because it gives you access and the right to live in a number of different jurisdictions. It is a much larger, more well-known countries. Generally, the visa-free travel is, I think, an overrated criteria. People who have enough money to drop, to purchase a St. Lucia citizenship, who have that much disposable income, are not people who are going to have problems getting long-term multiple entries in any country they really want to go to. They're the kind of high-end tourists that every country is happy to go to. So you would want to get a European citizenship by lineage if you have it. It's cheaper than the Caribbean. But if you're looking at citizenship by investment, for example, in Malta, which is really a residence by investment with a shortened naturalization period, it's because you want the other benefit. You may want to go live in Switzerland. You may want to live in Italy on a lump sum basis. You may want to live in Portugal on a non-habitual tax resident basis. So it's really that it gives you access to other places and the ability to pass it on to your children and future generations who may want to do a gap year, study, or live in those other countries.
And David, I agree with your notion that wealthy people don't really care about what the visa requirements are to enter countries. So the visa-free access is, in my view, also a bit overblown. But a corollary to that, which I think is important, at least for Americans more so than Canadians, is there's this underlying worry that an American who expatriates may not be able to get a visa because it's not well founded in the law. And in fact, it's up to the discretion of the immigration officer at any US embassy or consulate where you'd be applying for a visa. So for an American to shell out a lot more money to get let's say a European passport where they don't need a visa because Europe and the US have what's called a visa waiver program. That means an American can show up in Europe without a visa and a European can show up in America without a visa. For the little tiny Caribbean countries, that's not true. There's this discretion element. And so for a lot of clients, removing that discretion element, even had a client apply for citizenship in Canada because, under the old NAFTA agreement, there's really, it would be virtually impossible for the US to block a Canadian from coming into the US. So I think being able to return to your home country is important. As you mentioned, the ability to live in a bunch of different countries. If you want to live in France or live half the year in the Swiss Alps and the other half the year on the Italian Riviera, move around, work, have your children go to university, access, Europeans' healthcare system, all of those things, it may be worth it. On the other hand, other people might say, I'd rather just, take the cheap option and, I can, like you say, I'll be able to get into Europe or anywhere I want to go without, paying millions of dollars.
And just on that one point, the U.S. visa waiver program, each country is listed on there. Not all European countries have always been on it. Poland, for example, just recently was added to the U.S. visa waiver program. So you do need to look at the U.S. visa waiver program. But again, for this level of client, I did my first client expatriated in 1990. And during that time, I've never had a client who needed a visa be refused a visa, nor have I had a client that did need a visa have a problem coming in. Generally, the problem is not coming in. The problem is staying too long and triggering the substantial presence test or not being able to have a tax treaty position. So I like saying Homeland Security is saying, come on in, and the IRS is standing behind them whispering, and we hope you stay too long.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Okay. How does residency or citizenship affect my taxes in the US or Canada?
Well, I could jump in quickly on that.
Sure.
I mean, from the US perspective, it at the outset, it really doesn't. The US doesn't tax you based on residence, they tax you based on citizenship. So as long as you have US citizenship, you're going to be subject to all types of US tax, income, gift, estate tax, on and on and on. Now, by living abroad and earning your money abroad, you can qualify for things like the foreign earned income exclusion. You don't even need to have a citizenship to qualify for that, but it certainly makes it easier if you have another residence or citizenship. In the case of Canada, it's great in the sense that they do tax you based on residence. So once you become non-resident for Canadian tax purposes, you won't owe Canadian tax going forward. So that's a big distinction between the US and Canada.
All right, so we have some questions from the audience. I have ancestry in Sweden and Czech Republic, but they migrated to the US in the late 1800s. Is that too distant to qualify for anything?
It's very fact specific. We had this during my session also. We need to know where people were born, when they immigrated, when they naturalized in Canada, US, or wherever they came, and a whole family tree. And with that, we can very quickly answer the question, but it's so fact specific and each country has its own rules with regards to, sometimes they didn't allow dual citizenship, sometimes they did, sometimes it was fraternal, sometimes it was maternal, sometimes it was both. So people really need to, and they can send an email to me at david@lesbronceassociates.com and we'll reply to it with your specific situation.
Got it. What are the minimum requirements for St. Kitts citizenship? And is it better to have than St. Lucia or Dominica?
Sorry, could you say the first part again?
So what are the minimum requirements for St. Kitts citizenship? And is it better to have than St. Lucia or Dominica?
So St. Kitts is, in the Caribbean, been sort of the leader of the pack. They've had the kind of program the longest. It's also the most expensive. The kind of information that you need is virtually the same. It's a list of documents that includes your birth certificate, marriage certificates, high school, college diplomas, background check, FBI, all of those things. So it's not hugely different. The real estate component in NEVA St. Kitts is a bit higher. I always tell clients that if you're going to do NEVA St. Kitts, you're better off actually trying to be well above the minimum investment amount. Because if you go out and buy if you can afford it and you can buy a multi-million-dollar beautiful villa somewhere, it will appreciate in value. And if you sell it in 5 years or 10 years, you will make money, probably substantially amounts of money on that type of investment. On the other hand, if you go up and down the beach, you'll find that, every tiny little 400 square foot condo costs $450,000 because that's the amount that you have to, spend to qualify for the citizenship there. And then after you have your citizenship and you go to resell it, well, guess what? You're not going to get 450,000. You might get 250,000. So, when you look at that, then you ask yourself, maybe it's better to just do the straight payment option, or, some of the other countries, I think you don't have quite as big of glut, meaning, you don't end up with that kind of demand supply dynamic. That's my 2 cents on that.
And I think that's very much the same. I mean, I look at, and we do Caribbean citizenships, even if clients have lineage citizenships, because they want to trigger, they want to be able to leave sooner rather than later, and that Irish citizenship may take a while to come through. And let's face it, and I agree with the comment that Joel made earlier, which is St. Lucia right now for it's actually a single and a couple. St. Lucia is the cheapest. If you look at the opportunity cost of the bond, or you turn around and you borrow that, your borrowing costs over 5 years, if we're just talking about a couple, it comes out to be the cheapest. Processing time is about the same. The only country which has one differential is Grenada, is on the list of countries which are on the E1, E2 option. So if you've got somebody who is looking for an entry point into the United States and they're not on an E country already, and they have a long waiting list, maybe for the EB5, they may do an E2, but they're pretty much, all the same. And then the question is, if you want real estate and you really look at, I have clients who are looking at, Joel mentioned a particular development in Dominica, which I have a client who is looking, who got caught in Texas and is looking really for a bug out zone, and it's a beautiful place, and so they're going to purchase a villa there, far beyond what they need to do for the citizenship purposes, because they want to have a bug out. The Dominica citizenship for them is just really guaranteeing them access to their hideaway, and so you really have to look at what the client is trying to achieve. Do they want to own real estate, or do they want to simply, and then they have to look at resale, fair market value, or are they really looking at, this is a tool for doing something else?
All right. So next question. How much time can I be in the US and still qualify as a non-resident for the foreign earned income exclusion?
So could you say the question again? I didn't understand if it was an expatriation situation, or what are you talking about here? Just somebody that has a
How
second.
How much time can I be in the US and still qualify as a non-resident? So I assume someone is just a resident of a place like Portugal, and they want to probably still visit the US, but they want to know how much time they can spend in the US and still qualify as a non-resident in regard to the foreign earned income exclusion.
Joel, I think what they're asking is that they're a U.S. citizen. The real question is, how much time do they have to spend outside of the United States to establish the foreign tax home for the foreign earned income? exemption. I think that's the question
Yeah.
they're asking.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I was just not understanding at the beginning whether it was somebody that had given up their citizenship already, which I think there's two different analysis. But in terms of foreign earned income exclusion, your primary residence, your domicile, it has to be outside the United States. There are different tests that you can pass, that you can go down, substantial presence test, their date tests, their safe harbor tests. But at the end of the day, you really have to be living and working abroad to qualify for the foreign earned income exclusion. And I'm always really reluctant when clients try to press me on days, because, I think if you run close to, if that's your formula, you're probably, something's going to happen, and then you're going to go over that formula. You should really be living, full time. Now, if you're living full time and you come back for a month in the summer, or come back for Christmas, you come for your mother's birthday, you don't have to worry about that. But if your primary residence is outside the United States, I think a lot of people would tell you that the real answer is about 4 months. You can spend about 4 months in the U.S. without having too much worry. Once you start going over 4 months, 5 months, and certainly if you go over 183 days, then you're going to have a problem, unless you meet certain exemptions. Like if you spend too much time in the U.S. Well, last year the IRS waived the day requirements because of COVID. So if you got stuck in the U.S., you could have been in the U.S. 365 days theoretically and still claim the foreign earned income exclusion. But that would be hard. Normally, you're not going to get away with that. So I don't know, David, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, that last exemption I'm calling the Prince Harry exemption. Never got a resident alien status, hopefully, from his American spouse, and if he got a visa status, he got a non-immigrant visa status. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The clients need to, whether they're moving states or really kind of going out, they need to mentally wrap their minds around the fact that they have to move from a practical viewpoint. Sure, they can come back and visit, but they really have to move themselves outside. I have clients who said, "Oh, I'm going to move from New York to Florida, but I'm really going to spend time in New York." And I said, "You have a cell phone. That cell phone is pinging off of a tower every 1 to 2 seconds. So of course they're going to know that you're standing in your favorite bodega buying milk in one of the 5 boroughs. So they know when you're in a specific place or not in a specific place. So you really need to kind of wrap that concept around your mind, and you need to be able to again, the plans that Joel or I would come up with for families. We like to say it needs to make fiscal sense. So you got to sell it at the boardroom table, but it also has to be livable for the family. So you got to sell it at the breakfast table. So this is a concept, whether you're moving abroad and seeking a foreign earned income exemption, or you're looking for an expatriation or becoming non-resident in Canada, you have to look at not just the tax, which is a tangible benefit, but you also need to look at, is this something which is going to be an increase in lifestyle and bonus for the family, as opposed to an unbearable burden.
I like to call it the head issues and the heart issues, and you really have to be able to make both of them work.
Okay, so next question is, in addition to the country payments or investment, how much does it typically cost to acquire a second citizenship or passport? Rachel talked about this in regard to Panama, but and Joel, you've mentioned price points, but maybe kind of more general. Yeah, I think people just want to know real price ranges. The highest ones are going millions. Joel, you can talk about those ones, but they're definitely expensive.
So you have the cost of whatever it is you have to do to get citizenship, whether it's an investment or a payment. And so that's one sort of category. If you have to buy real estate, that would be another thing. That's another cost, but it's real estate that you own. So instead of it being a payment, it's an acquisition cost. In some countries, you can start a business, capitalize that business with X amount of capital. It's still your money, but you have to commit that amount of money. Then, in addition to those types of costs, you've got whatever the application costs are. Frequently, they involve things like background checks. I'm not talking about the $50 you pay for your FBI background check. I'm talking about the foreign country hiring an international agency to do a full-blown background check on you, to know every single thing there is to know, your speeding tickets, everything and anything. And they will do that. Those can be $5,000, $10,000 a person. Most of the Caribbean ones, the primary applicant, $7,500. The additional applicants are, around 5,000. So, those types of things can add up. You have local registered agents. Almost every country requires that an application goes through a local registered agent. Then you're going to have lawyers, whether, like Rachel said, you use a lawyer in the country where you're going, like Panama, or use an international lawyer, such as David or myself. And those things add up. I would say for a family of four, it's not unreasonable to think in terms of extra fees in the $50,000 range. Could be more, particularly in countries like Malta and Austria, where the costs are a lot more and the work that goes into the process is a lot greater. But I think that's a fair representation. If you had two adults, two kids, and you're applying for a citizenship somewhere, you're going to have those basic things: the investment cost, whatever it is you're buying, and then the ancillary legal background fees. So,
Well, and one of the things I want to say, I often get asked this kind of question, and I tell clients, well, that's the equivalent when you want to have a house of walking into Home Depot and asking the price of bricks. You first need to have an architect design the house that's going to work for you. So, and that architect will then price out what a proper house, one that's not going to blow over given whatever threat or consideration that's going to be livable. So, I mean, you can, when you add up everything, for example, St. Lucia in the bond borrowing cost, depending on what your borrowing costs are, commission back, etc., that's going to be 145, 150,000 US sunk cost gone, and that'll cover everything. When Eric Schmidt bought his Cypriot citizenship, he was looking at, by the time he did his required investment, real estate, and he took a bond option, paid all his fees, he was close to 3 million euros. Now, some of that, 2 million of that, was an asset acquisition that he was going to, hopefully get back. So you really need to kind of understand what it is you're trying to achieve and really do an analysis up front with the architect to see whether these solutions are appropriate. And I see in some of the questions, for example, there's a Bulgaria and Turkey, which have Bulgaria has a residence leading to citizenship program. Bulgaria is part of the EU that has the Treaty of Rome rights. It is the previous program I wouldn't have gone anywhere near. The new program is the legal basis is there. We've got clients that are in that process. It, like Malta, is really a residence by investment with a shorter naturalization period. You put 500,000 in Bulgarian bonds. You can have the advantages. You can call up your broker in the United States. You simply need to show that you own those bonds. You get a residence permit. After a year, you put that up to a total of €1 million. So you add another 500,000. You're probably going to spend by the time all the legal fees and security check fees and all those other things, you're probably looking at about 60, 70,000 in sunk costs. And during the second year, if it works out, then you're going to get a Bulgarian citizenship, but you need to keep that investment for a total of 4 years. But again, you know, if you're worried about the credit worthiness of your Bulgarian bonds, then you hedge that. So you need to kind of look at all the different costs. Turkey, interesting program, very popular. They were tremendously overpriced at the beginning, million US. They sold none. They dropped the price. They're the number one in the market. So, you know, they understood the market. You have a real estate option. You also have a fund option. You also have a bank deposit option. Real estate has been very popular because a lot of the markets that were buying that from the Middle East and from China like real estate. The problem is the Turkish lira has taken a nosedive. And of course, all that real estate is denominated in that currency. So, you know, a longer term better play would be to have a bank deposit, which you can put in US dollars, euros, yen, whatever you want. And if you want, but of course, you're going to have little to no return on that. So you'll have an opportunity cost, but at least you won't have the foreign exchange risk. And, you know, if you want to go in the middle of that, then you look at the private equity options. So it's really understanding, the first question is, does Turkey meet the needs as a jurisdiction? If that's the right product, then what's the best way of doing that Turkish citizenship by investment?
All right, thanks, David. Specific question that just came up. I don't know if we have an answer for it, but how much depth is the due diligence process for ex-military personnel?
I don't think the due diligence is going to be any different for civilians or military or ex-military. I've had clients in both. The background checks are, you know, they're fairly extensive. I don't think they're trying to delve into, you know, what activity you did while you're in the military, assuming everything you did was legal. Normally, with regard to military, they're going to ask for your discharge papers that show, you know, if you, you know, left on good terms, honorable discharge, things like that. And they'll certainly look at that military record, but, you know, I don't think anybody is going to analyze what you did while you're in the military. Was that justified or something like that? But in terms of the background check, the FBI report, it's all pretty much the same. It's just that's just one more element that you have to add when you're in the military is your, you know, your military discharge papers.
Yeah, I mean, the only time military would become significant was if you were a major general and they were looking at you as a politically exposed person. But generally, you know, normal military service is again, as Joel said, just another. They want to know that you were honorably discharged, and that there's no, you know, lingering criminal charges that arose, you know, as a result of your civilian or military activities.
Along those lines, how many years back do background checks go? Would a DUI from 11 years ago be an issue?
Depends on the country. Some go back 18, some go back 5, some go back 10. It also looks at the charge. Obviously, a DUI is a horse of a different color from a murder charge or some more serious felony-like charge. And I think it was Rachel was mentioning, you know, getting expunged. Some countries, such as Canada, you need to go through an equivalency. You know, if you had done that act in Canada, what would you have been charged with? Then they look at, you know, the period of time, whether you've had any. I always get this word wrong. Recidivism. Never say it right. Thank you, Joel. And We all have one word. That's mine. And and so they look at that, and so it really depends on what country you're looking at. DUIs, so long as they weren't, it was a one-off and quite a while ago, is generally an issue that can be dealt with. But again, this is where you want to have, a good advisor, because that can be the difference. It could add a tremendous amount of time to an application, and it's not something you want to hide, because they generally will find out about it. And if you didn't disclose it up front, then that raises the question, what else have you tried to hide? Whereas if you identify it up front and deal with it, then it's an issue dealt with, moving on to the next thing.
I think that's a great point, David. I mean, I tell clients that all the time. You don't ever want a foreign government to discover something about you that you haven't already disclosed. So you're better off, we've even, when we've had questionable cases, we've even been able to, work through the local lawyer, local registered agent to say, can you informally take this up the flagpole to see if there's going to be pushback on it? We've seen that, for example, with drug charges. Generally, if it was in the past and it was something involving usage, hey, you got arrested 25 years ago for having a couple of joints in your pocket, nobody's really going to care about that. But at the moment where it's a larger amount, that if you were charged, for example, with dealing, that's a whole different thing. And sometimes it doesn't matter how far back it is. It could be 30, 40 years ago. It's, if you were charged and convicted of a felony, they're not going to look the other way on that. So again, like David said, each country is specific. The charge, I've had it go the other way too, where they've, like David was saying about the equivalency in the particular country. They look at something and say, wow, we can't believe that somebody got charged and that was considered a crime, because in our country that would have been a ticket and a $500 fine, and that would have been the end of it. So it can go both ways.
Okay, I think we have a couple minutes, so this is the last question. So in terms of speed, what is the quickest and most effective way to obtain access to the EU citizenship?
It's probably still the lineage citizenship, because right now, with Cyprus having closed their program last November, there isn't a true citizenship by investment program. But lineage citizenship is completely dependent upon you either have the family history or you don't. So if you do, then that's going to be the fastest. If you don't, I think, Joel, we're really looking at Malta and or Bulgaria as the fastest ones. And there you're looking at, from kind of the word go until you have a citizenship certificate and a passport in hand, you're effectively looking at 20 to 24 months.
All right, so I think we'll
compare that with some of the Caribbean ones. Again, St. Lucia has an expedite that you can bring down to 6 to 8 weeks rather than 3-4 months. Otherwise, 3 or 4 months is pretty standard. So I think one of David's earlier comments, if we have clients that are looking at some of these European options that might take years, they may supplement and do both. I have a number of clients doing things like St. Lucia citizenship, Portuguese residence. In the end, it's really the Portuguese citizenship they want, but in the meantime, that's the good sort of holding pattern until they get to the other end of that.
One more program I wanted to mention, not very popular in North America, but certainly a big seller in China, is the Pacific island of Vanuatu. I'm completely agnostic with regards to jurisdictions, and when you retain somebody like Joel or I, the first thing we look at in examining these kind of programs is what's the legal basis. And Vanuatu offers a status called honorary citizenship. And honorary citizenship in international law is a bit like being honorarily pregnant. It doesn't produce the desired result. And so that hasn't stopped it, them from selling a lot of these statuses and issuing real passports, but that those people are not citizens, and countries don't apply visa requirements on citizens or on passport holders. They're required on citizens. So I've been quite vocal in telling the Vanuatu government that they need to correct that status. They've been quite vocal in completely ignoring me. But I would say that it's definitely caveat emptor. And we've seen, throughout history, Joel and I've been around long enough to have seen various programs kind of blow up. And so here's my prediction live and on recording that will blow up. And so it's a little cheaper than St. Lucia, but not worth $1 in my mind.
Well, in Vanuatu, they aggressively came out and said they would accept cryptocurrency for payment. And, now the Europeans are saying, well, wait a minute, we don't know that we like that. And they're seriously looking at taking away their visa-free entry status, which end up hurting, a lot of the local folks that actually come from Vanuatu. So,
Yeah,
but
Vanuatu.
Yeah.
All right. We have to jump on to the next panel coming up, Bitcoin and gold. So thanks everyone for being on this one. And we are going to jump over to that right now as it's starting right now. All right. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.